Well, the controversy around Bill C-5 is the way the House ends this sitting as it goes into summer break. The bill will, by the by, head to the Senate next. And with that, happy to have on the program Robert Fife, Ottawa Bureau Chief for the Globe and Mail, Tonda MacCharles, Ottawa Bureau Chief for the Toronto Star, and Joël-Denis Bellavance, Ottawa Bureau Chief for La Presse. Hello to all three of you.
Hey. Hi, Michael. Thank you.
So here you have Mark Carney, and as promised, he wanted to get this bill passed by Canada Day. It looks like it's on track to do so as it heads towards the Senate. But, not without a lot of controversy regarding consultation with Indigenous groups, concerns about environmental regulations. Is Mark Carney squandering political capital by pushing this through as quickly as he has, despite all these criticisms?
Well, I don't think he's going to lose a lot of political capital at this point. I think it's going to happen when you actually see the kind of infrastructure projects that are going to be approved. Some of them I think people will find they're going to be okay. Others they will find they're not. But what we're seeing here is that when it comes to major economic projects, that they can't rely on the Bloc Québécois and they can't rely on the NDP. And they are going to have to rely on the Conservatives. As long as it's in the country's national interest, from both of those parties' perspectives, the Conservatives and Liberals, Conservatives seem willing to support them. But their caveat is, that we saw with C-5, is they're not going to put up with the Liberals trying to sneak things through the back door. So they made some amendments to this legislation that would have exempted cabinet ministers, for example, from issues involving lobbying and conflict of interest. We don't need to get into that, but they are going to give them, in the final analysis, if it's in the country's interest, they'll support them initially, at least for now. But they're not having a blank slate here. They can't just do whatever they want. And one other thing is that C-5 wasn't as bad as other bills that we've seen this government put in, C2 and C4, that are very problematic and are going to have to be, the Conservatives or any party can support them. They're not going to even get through the Senate because they're badly drafted. And I think Mr. Carney needs to really think about, when he's doing legislation, not to allow everybody in government, and security agents in particular, to throw everything that they have always wanted into the mix in legislation, because it does affect the individual civil liberties of Canadians.
Well, and I will pick up on that, because yes, the C-5 does not necessarily deal with civil liberties, but it does deal with consultation, which is of course in the Constitution. It does deal with environmental regulations, which has been such a focus of the previous Liberal government, Tonda.
Yeah, I mean, I think Bob's right on the question of, does Mr. Carney lose or expend too much capital at this stage? That I think the real rubber hits the road when we get the list of projects. And I think in order to advance those projects, Mr. Carney will have to do more than delegate to people. He'll have to engage himself with Indigenous leaders and with, frankly, some of the minority party leaders as well, I think, in a way that we haven't yet seen. But I agree that, some of the other legislation, in particular the border bill, which has all these other security provisions, there's a clear sort of line there that's been crossed. It became a kitchen sink bill. They threw in all kinds of things, an omnibus bill. And they would perhaps be better served by splitting some of these things, but they don't seem willing to. Same with the one economy bill. It's got both the nation building stuff and the trade barriers piece. They would have been able to expedite the internal trade barriers lifting if they'd split that bill too. Unwilling to do so. So I think what we're going to have to see is, we're probably going to see Mr. Carney put some water in his wine, actually, as the months come forward. The summer especially, I think he's going to have to engage on a very substantive level with Indigenous leaders on these nation-building projects.
Well, I will say, this honeymoon phase almost but because of this honeymoon phase, the government's almost moving as if it's a majority government. But at the end of the day, it is a minority government, and as the honeymoon wears off, where do they make their compromise to get things passed? Joël-Denis, what do you say about, the political capital being spent on C-5?
I think he's not spending much on it, because I think he feels he's got a mandate to do that, and he's got the support of all premiers as well, which is an interesting thing, because I haven't seen the Premier criticize this bill. In fact, they are endorsing it quite forcefully. And I agree with Bob and Tonda on the following element. the very first project that will be announced by the government will be looked at through a microscope. Has the government done its homework on consulting First Nations? Has the government done the homework necessary to protect the environment? And is this project in the national interest really? So this is going to be a critical one. So the very big announcement, I think, will be followed through. And one other element I want to say is that Mr. Carney, I think, is not being helped because he doesn't have his chief of staff on a permanent basis. Mark Carney will come later. There's also a new clerk from the Privy Council that will be coming into his job, Michael Sabia. And I think those people will advise, I think, in Mr. Carney to take the time necessary to consult people properly to avoid unnecessary friendly fire attacks on his agenda. So that's going to be critical. Summer months maybe, I think, will be helpful for the government to think through how they should proceed. If they want to go fast, they need to do things properly as well.
But, you know, Michael, we may not see as much controversy with the Tier 1 projects because some of these are already well in advance. I'll give you an example. The Kitimat natural gas, which there's going to be one LNG facility that's going to be going by the end of the month. They'd like to have a second LNG facility there. All the environmental stuff, the Indigenous, plus there's Indigenous buy-in of this, but all of this has been approved. That is a project that can be approved very quickly, providing the investors in the LNG project want to go ahead with it. And I think they probably will because it makes good sense, right?
Yeah.
Or there's a uranium project in northern Saskatchewan that has had provincial government approval, has all the environmental approvals and Indigenous approval, but it's been delayed by Ottawa regulations. That can be approved quickly. So I think the Tier 1 ones will go quickly, but the Tier 2 or the Tier 3 ones is where you're going to run into problems because there has to be Indigenous consultation, and you need to have some kind of a proper environmental assessment because this can all get clogged up in the courts. Even if you want to move stuff quickly, if the courts start intervening in these projects, then you're going to be into a lot of problems.
Yeah, it slows it down, ironically, as opposed to trying to speed it up. Listen, so, you know, as we watch all this kind of make its way Tier 1 and the projects beyond, I also want to talk about that, you know, Parliament's going to go on summer break now, so am I.
But not Mark Carney.
Not Carney. No, not Mark Carney, because he actually is now, and the government's going to be involved in this negotiation, this 30-day period triggered in Kananaskis with the United States to try to come up with some new trade and security deal. I'm kind of wondering what a win looks like, because, you know, under Kuzma, you had, what, about 98% of goods going across the border tariff-free. Does this deal have to be tariff-free to be a success for this Liberal government, or is there a level of percentage of tariff that would be acceptable and still be seen as a win for the government?
Well, that's a really good question. The Canadian government's position that it has to be tariff-free, and we are seeing the outlays of a possible deal. He's ticked off the 2% for the GDP for defense spending. We just saw him ticking off earlier this week on the aluminum and steel that we're going to stop anti-dumping, which I think is a big concern from the Americans. They're worried about Chinese or Vietnamese or South Korean, Indian dumping steel into the market. But a problem we all have is nobody knows what Donald Trump's going to do. The U.S. Treasury Secretary had stayed the full 2 days at the G7, so they're trying to work out an agreement because I think he understands it's really important to have a deal with Canada. But who knows with Trump? It's impossible to figure out.
And going to Kananaskis, he says, you know, I see the logic or the love of a tariff, but what?
He said, I'm a tariff person.
That's what it was. That's
and
what it was.
He has said that consistently. That was my question. He says it. I asked it because he has been consistent, and no matter what any of his officials say behind closed doors, the decision is at the Resolute desk in the Oval Office in Trump's hands, and he has never wavered. And so you asked the question, what does success look like? Is there a world in which all of these tariffs get lifted? I think we saw from the Prime Minister on Thursday a clear signal that there may not be a world in which all tariffs are lifted. He's laying the ground for Canadians to understand there may be still at the end of whatever deal, if they come to one by the 21st of July, some tariffs in place, and then they will hope to negotiate further, perhaps in the context of a CUSMA review, a free trade deal review. But I don't still see where there's been any concrete signal that we're going to see all tariffs lifted. I think that Mr. Trump's made it really clear that's the foundational piece of his foreign policy, his economic policy, it's his revenue generator, it's also the way he wants to bring jobs back to the U.S. So I don't see it, and I think, I think we're getting ready for another scenario.
Yeah, I share Tonda's skepticism about the deal with Mr. Trump. Also because he concluded a so-called framework with Great Britain, and there still remains 10% at least minimum on most exportations from Great Britain. I expect that to be the baseline, the template for the deals with other countries, including Canada. Mr. Trump may say that he loves Canada, he wants to annex us, but he is not going to give, he's not going to make any gifts to Canada, not to Mr. Carney. And so what will be a deal for Canada? Trying to eliminate all the tariffs, I think it's mission impossible from Mr. Carney's perspective. That's why I think he did unveil a series of packages that could come into force on July 21st if negotiations fail, which I expect will be the case.
Yeah, well, although I will say this, if some form of tariff still exists, it basically tells Canadians you can't take your foot off the gas in terms of diversifying this economy, because if you were to remove it all, then we possibly could go back to where we were. So perhaps there is a positive for the overall Canadian economy in the long term if there is some form of tariff from the United States. But we'll see where that goes. Quickly, running out of time, I did have one more question, but I'm going to drop the question because I do want to make a statement. You three are a joy every week as we wrap up, because I said Parliament's going to rise for summer. We here at Primetime Politics will be back if anything big happens, but we're not back until Parliament gets back. But you three, I really adore you three. I adore the time with you guys.
It's
so thank you very much.
TGIF.
It is our
we all look forward to it.
Thank you.
We have fun.
Yeah, and that has nothing to do with the whiskey under the desk. Anyway, so I'm
Nothing
joking.
to do with the makeup room discussions.
No, that will never make it to air. Tonda, JD, thank you
Thanks.
for today.
Have a good
Thank you,
summer.
always. And to you, have a great
you.
summer.